The little boy stood in my kitchen holding a Spider-Man backpack, his dark eyes watching me with a mixture of fear and defiance. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. My husband Marcus had his hand on the child's shoulder, protective, possessive, in a way he'd never touched our own daughter. "This is Julian," Marcus said, his voice carrying that edge of challenge I'd learned to recognize over 12 years of marriage. "He's going to be staying with us." I stared at the child, then at my husband, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. "What do you mean, staying with us?" "Marcus, whose child is this?" "He's mine." The words came out flat, matter of fact, as though he'd just announced he'd picked up groceries. "I found out about him 3 months ago. His mother died last week. He has nowhere else to go." The kitchen floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Our daughter Zoe was upstairs doing homework, completely unaware that her father had just walked through the door with living proof of his betrayal. A child, not just an affair, a whole human being that had existed for 7 years without my knowledge. "Get out," I whispered. "Claire, be reasonable." "Get out." The scream tore from my throat before I could stop it. The little boy flinched, and I felt a stab of guilt even through my shock. This wasn't his fault. None of this was his fault. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This is my house too. Julian is my son, and he's staying. You're going to have to accept that." He walked past me, guiding the boy toward the stairs, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen where I'd made thousands of family dinners, where I'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where I'd built a life I thought was real. 8 years earlier, I'd been standing in this same kitchen, pregnant with Zoe, painting the walls a soft yellow because Marcus said it would make the space feel warmer. We'd been married 4 years then, still in that phase where we finished each other's sentences and made love on lazy Sunday mornings. "I want at least 3 kids, Marcus had said, his hand resting on my swollen belly. "A whole house full, chaos and noise and love everywhere." 3? I'd laughed. "Let's see how we handle one first." But after Zoe was born, something shifted. Marcus threw himself into his construction company, working longer hours, coming home later. When I'd bring up having another baby, he'd cite finances, timing, stress. "Maybe next year," became his standard response. Then maybe when the company's more stable, until eventually I stopped asking. I'd thought it was about work pressure. Now I understood. He'd already had another child. While I was rocking Zoe to sleep, reading her bedtime stories, teaching her to tie her shoes, he'd been living a second life with another woman, another child. The woman's name was Vanessa. I learned later that night after I'd put a shocked and confused Zoe to bed, after I'd set up the guest room for Julian in a daze of surreal horror. Marcus told me the story like he was recounting a business deal, emotionless and transactional. "It was a brief thing. A mistake. She got pregnant, decided to keep the baby. I paid child support, but she didn't want me involved. Said she could handle it alone." He poured himself a scotch, his third of the evening. I respected that. Sent money every month, but stayed away. For 7 years. My voice sounded hollow, distant. "You had another child for 7 years and never told me." What was I supposed to say? It was over before it really began. It didn't affect us. Didn't affect our family. Didn't affect. I couldn't even finish the sentence. Every time I asked about having another baby, every time you said we couldn't afford it or the timing wasn't right, you were already supporting another child. You let me think I was asking for too much when you'd already given someone else everything. That's not fair. Fair? The laugh that escaped me was jagged, broken. "You're lecturing me about fair?" He slammed his glass down on the counter. "Vanessa is dead, Claire. She overdosed last week. Julian has no other family. What did you want me to do? Put him in foster care? He's my son. And what is Zoe? What am I? Were we ever real to you? Or were we just the acceptable public version of your life while you had this whole other world hidden away?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, I woke to find Julian sitting at the kitchen table while Marcus made breakfast, something he never did for our family. Pancakes, bacon, fresh orange juice. Zoe stumbled in, still in her pajamas, and stopped short when she saw the boy. "Who's that?" Marcus didn't even look at me. "Zoe, this is Julian. He's your brother. He's going to be living with us now." I watched my daughter's face cycle through confusion, shock, and something that looked like betrayal. At 12, she was old enough to understand what this meant. "My brother? But how?" "Your father had an affair," I said quietly. Julian is the result. His mother passed away, so he's here now. Marcus shot me a furious look. Did you have to be so blunt? Would you prefer I lie? Add that to the collection? Zoe burst into tears and ran from the kitchen. Julian stared at his plate, small and miserable. And Marcus looked at me like I was the villain in this scenario. Like my refusal to immediately embrace his secret child made me cruel. The first week was a special kind of hell. Marcus moved into the guest room to give Julian stability, he claimed, as though the child's presence was the reason for our separation and not the nuclear bomb he'd dropped on our marriage. He enrolled Julian in Zoe's school, bought him new clothes, new toys, treated him with an attentiveness he'd never shown our daughter. Zoe noticed. How could she not? Why does Dad take Julian to school but makes me take the bus? She asked one morning, her voice small and hurt. I don't know, sweetheart. Why does Julian get a new iPad when you said I had to wait until my birthday? I don't know. Does Dad love him more than me because I'm not new? That question broke something in me. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her shake with silent sobs. Your father loves you. He's handling this badly. Very badly. But was that even true? The more I watched Marcus with Julian, the more I wondered if this was actually how he wanted to parent, fully present, engaged, attentive, and Zoe and I had simply never inspired that level of commitment from him. Marcus's mother, Patricia, arrived the second week with her trademark blend of judgment and interference. She swept into the house with shopping bags full of gifts for Julian, barely acknowledging Zoe. My grandson needs proper things, she announced, unpacking expensive clothes and electronics. Marcus told me the poor child has been living in squalor. That woman clearly didn't know how to be a proper mother. I stood in the doorway, watching her fuss over Julian while Zoe sat invisible on the couch, and felt rage building in my chest like a storm system. That woman had a name, I said quietly. Vanessa. And she raised Julian alone for 7 years while your son paid her off to stay quiet about his affair. Patricia's face hardened. Affairs happen, Claire. A wife handles these things with grace and discretion. Not by making scenes and turning children against their father. I haven't turned anyone against anyone. Marcus did that himself by bringing home a child none of us knew existed. Well, the boy is here now, and he's family. I suggest you start acting like it. She turned back to Julian with a warm smile that had never been directed at Zoe. Now, sweetie, what would you like for dinner? Grandma will make anything you want. Later that night, I found Zoe crying in her room. Grandma used to make me cookies every visit, she whispered. Today she walked right past me like I wasn't even there. It's like Julian being here makes me invisible. I held my daughter while she cried, and something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just about Marcus's betrayal anymore. This was about my child being erased in her own home, treated as less important than the evidence of her father's infidelity. That couldn't stand. The breaking point came 3 weeks after Julian's arrival. It was Zoe's 13th birthday, a milestone I'd been planning for months. I'd organized a small party with her friends, ordered her favorite cake, wrapped the guitar she'd been begging for since Christmas. Marcus forgot. He came home late with Julian, both of them carrying bags from the arcade. Sorry, lost track of time, he said breezily. Julian wanted to play games. Zoe's face crumpled. Her friends were in the living room, the cake was on the table, and her father had just walked in having spent her birthday entertaining his other child. It's Zoe's birthday, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Marcus had the grace to look embarrassed. Shit. Zoe, I'm sorry, You forgot. She stood up, tears streaming down her face. You forgot my birthday because you were too busy with him. You forget everything about me now. I could disappear and you wouldn't even notice because you have a better kid to replace me with. She ran upstairs. The party dissolved into awkward silence. Zoe's friends left early, shooting sympathetic looks and whispering to their parents. Julian stood in the corner looking guilty and confused. And Marcus had the audacity to look wounded, like he was the victim here. She's being dramatic, he muttered. That's when I knew I was done protecting him. I called my lawyer the next morning. Richard Chen had handled my father's estate and several business acquisitions for my family's real estate investment firm. He was smart, ruthless, and owed me favors. I need a divorce, I told him. And I need to make sure my daughter is protected from the absolute disaster my husband has created. Tell me everything, Richard said, and I did. The affair, the secret child, the years of lies. The child support he'd been paying while telling me we couldn't afford another baby. The way he was systematically erasing Zoe from her own life to make room for Julian. The financial records I'd already started pulling. Marcus's construction company was doing better than he'd led me to believe, which meant he'd been hiding money. How detailed are your financial records? Richard asked. I handle all our accounts. I have everything. Good. Don't tell him you're filing. We need time to build the case. And Claire? Document everything. Every time he prioritizes Julian over Zoe, every broken promise, every lie. We're going to show exactly what kind of father he's been. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a woman I didn't recognize. Cold, calculating, strategic. I set up cameras in common areas of the house. I kept a journal documenting every interaction. I reached out to Vanessa's family and discovered she'd left behind letters, emails, text messages spanning 7 years of Marcus's involvement in Julian's life, far more than the brief mistake he'd described. He'd been at Julian's birth. He'd visited regularly until the boy was 3. He'd been a part-time father to one child while being an absent father to another. I also hired a private investigator. If Marcus had lied about this, what else had he lied about? The answer came back within a week. There had been other affairs. Nothing that produced children, but enough to establish a pattern of infidelity spanning our entire marriage. The truth was, I'd never really known my husband at all. Meanwhile, life at home deteriorated. Marcus grew increasingly hostile when I didn't perform the role of welcoming stepmother to Julian. His mother visited weekly, each time bringing gifts for her grandson while ignoring Zoe entirely. The message was clear. Julian was the important child. Zoe was just the inconvenient reminder of the first, lesser family. The worst incident came when Zoe made the school honor roll, straight A's, a huge accomplishment. I planned a celebration dinner at her favorite restaurant. When I told Marcus, he said they couldn't make it. Julian has a soccer game that night, so bring him after. Or skip it this once. This is important to Zoe. His soccer is important too, Claire. I'm not going to disappoint him. But you'll disappoint your daughter? Again? You're being unreasonable. Julian needs stability, needs to know I'm committed to being his father. And what about being Zoe's father? When did that stop mattering? We ended up going to dinner without him, just Zoe and me and my parents, who were horrified by how Marcus had been treating their granddaughter. My mother held Zoe while she cried into her pasta, and my father's face grew darker with every detail. He's erasing her, my mother said quietly while Zoe was in the bathroom. He's systematically erasing his own daughter because taking care of his guilt is easier than facing what he's done. I know, I said, and I'm going to stop it. The turning point came at Julian's school assembly. I attended because despite everything, the boy was innocent in this situation and deserved support. Marcus was there, of course, along with his mother. The principal asked families to stand when their child was recognized for achievement. When Julian's name was called for perfect attendance, Marcus and Patricia stood proudly. The principal smiled and said, "Wonderful. And I see his whole family is here supporting him." In that moment, I watched something break in Zoe's face. She was sitting 3 seats away from her father and grandmother, and neither of them had looked at her once. To everyone in that auditorium, Julian was the child that mattered. Zoe was just there. She got up and walked out. I followed her into the hallway and found her hyperventilating, her back against the lockers. "I can't breathe," she gasped. "Mom, I can't breathe." It was a full-blown panic attack. I held her, talked her through it, and in that moment made my final decision. This ended now. That evening, I served Marcus with divorce papers. His face went white as he read through the filing. "You're asking for full custody of Zoe?" "Yes. That's insane. I'm her father." "Then act like it." I kept my voice level, almost pleasant. "You have a choice, Marcus. You can fight me, and I will present evidence to a judge of how you've psychologically damaged our daughter by prioritizing your affair child over her. I have videos, journal entries, testimony from her therapist about the panic attacks she's started having. I have financial records showing you've spent 3 times as much on Julian in 3 weeks than you've spent on Zoe in the past year." His face had gone from white to red. "You're punishing Julian for existing. I'm protecting Zoe from being destroyed by her father's guilt. Julian needs a home and a father." "I agree with that. But Zoe needs her father too, and you've made it clear you don't have room for both of them." I slid another document across the table. "Here's my proposal. You have Julian full-time. I have Zoe full-time. You can visit with her twice a week under supervision until you can prove you remember she exists. We sell the house and split assets according to what I actually contributed to your business. What you contributed. My family invested the initial capital for your construction company. My father's connections got you your first 3 major contracts. I managed your books for 5 years before you hired an accountant. I'm owed 40% of your business, Marcus, and I'm going to take it. I pulled out another folder, this one thick with documentation. I also spoke with Vanessa's mother. She had letters, emails, text messages. You weren't an absent father to Julian by choice. You were a part-time father who visited when convenient and disappeared when it wasn't. You attended his 3rd birthday party, Marcus. You knew about his first day of kindergarten. You were far more involved than you led me to believe. His hand was shaking. I was trying to do the right thing. No, you were trying to have everything. 2 families, 2 lives, no consequences. You wanted to play devoted father to Julian without it costing you anything with Zoe and me. But you can't erase one child to make room for another, and I won't let you keep trying. The legal battle was swift and brutal. Richard had built an airtight case. Marcus's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, tried to argue that I was weaponizing custody, but the evidence was overwhelming. Video of Marcus forgetting Zoe's birthday, documentation of the disparity in spending, testimony from Zoe's therapist about the psychological damage of being systematically deprioritized. Statements from teachers who'd noticed the dramatic change in Zoe's behavior and academic performance since Julian's arrival. The judge was a woman in her 60s who'd spent 30 years in family court. She'd seen every variety of parental failure. When she read through the case files, her expression grew increasingly stern. "Mr. Harrison," she said during the hearing, "you brought a child into your home with no warning, no preparation, and no consideration for how it would affect your existing child. You then proceeded to give this new child preferential treatment while neglecting your daughter's emotional needs. The court finds that this behavior has caused significant psychological harm to Zoe Harrison." Marcus tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, I was trying to do right by both children." "No, Mr. Harrison. You were trying to assuage your guilt about your affair and your absence from your son's life by overcompensating at the expense of your daughter. That is not parenting. That is selfishness disguised as responsibility." The ruling came down hard. I got full physical custody of Zoe. Marcus got supervised visitation twice a week, with requirements that he attend family therapy and demonstrate consistent, appropriate parenting before unsupervised visits would be considered. He got full custody of Julian, with child support obligations that Richard had calculated to include back pay for the years of secret support. The financial settlement was equally devastating for Marcus. I walked away with 40% of his business, which I immediately used as leverage to force a buyout at current valuation, not the deflated numbers he'd been reporting. I got the house, which we would sell and split proceeds. I got Zoe's college fund fully funded. I got alimony for 5 years. His mother tried to intervene, showing up at my temporary apartment with threats and accusations. "You're destroying my son's life out of spite." "Your son destroyed his own life," I said calmly. "I'm just making sure he doesn't take Zoe down with him. You're welcome to have a relationship with both your grandchildren, Patricia, but if you continue to treat Zoe as less important than Julian, you won't have a relationship with either of them through me." She sputtered, outraged, but I closed the door. I was done being accommodating to people who'd made my daughter feel worthless. The most unexpected part of this whole nightmare was Julian himself. 3 months after the separation, he showed up at one of Zoe's supervised visits with Marcus. The boy looked smaller somehow, sadder. "I'm sorry," he said to Zoe, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know I was making everything bad. I just missed having a dad." Zoe looked at him for a long moment, and I saw her struggle with conflicting emotions. Anger that he'd taken her father, sympathy because he'd lost his mother, confusion about where he fit in this shattered family. "It's not your fault," she finally said. "None of this is your fault. But everyone's mad because I'm here." "No," I interjected gently. "Everyone's mad because your dad, our dad, handled this terribly. You didn't do anything wrong, Julian. You're just a kid who needed a family." Something shifted after that conversation. Slowly, painfully, Zoe and Julian began to build a tentative sibling relationship, not the forced instant family Marcus had tried to create, but something more real. They were both victims of their father's choices, both trying to figure out what family meant when the adults had broken all the rules. Marcus, meanwhile, struggled. Without me managing his schedule, his business, his life, he fell apart. The construction company hit financial troubles. Turns out I'd been the one keeping the books balanced and the projects on schedule. He missed visitation appointments. He forgot to sign permission slips. He was the same absent, unreliable father to Julian that he'd become to Zoe, and the boy began to see the truth. Dad promised to come to my game and he didn't show up, Julian told Zoe during one joint visit 6 months after the divorce. He said he had to work, but I think he just forgot. Zoe nodded knowingly. Yeah, he does that. They'd bonded over shared disappointment in their father. It would have been funny if it weren't so sad. A year after I'd filed for divorce, Marcus's mother requested a meeting. I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. She looked older, worn down in a way that suggested she'd finally been forced to see her son clearly. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. I was wrong. About everything. I thought you were being cruel, making things difficult out of spite. But I've been spending time with Julian, and I see how Marcus is with him. The same way he was with Zoe before. She trailed off. He's not capable of being the father either of them needs. No, I agreed. He's not. Zoe won't talk to me. She won't return my calls. You ignored her for months, Patricia. You brought Julian gifts and walked past her like she was invisible. You told me to handle my husband's affair with grace. What did you expect? I studied her face, looking for sincerity. You can try. But Patricia, if you hurt her again, if you make her feel less important than Julian one more time, I will cut you out completely. She's been through enough. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand. It took time, but slowly, Patricia began to rebuild her relationship with Zoe. She showed up at school events. She remembered birthdays. She made an effort to treat both grandchildren equally. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. 2 years after the divorce, I stood in the kitchen of my new house, smaller than the one I'd shared with Marcus, but entirely mine, watching Zoe help Julian with his homework. They were sitting at the table, heads bent together, and something about the image made my chest tight. They'd both been casualties of their father's choices, both forced to grow up too fast and navigate adult failures. But here they were, building something that looked like family despite everything. Not because Marcus had forced it, but because they'd chosen it. Mom, can Julian stay for dinner? Zoe called out. It was Marcus's weekend, but he'd called that morning to cancel. Some work emergency that Julian and I both knew was probably a lie. The boy had showed up at our door with his backpack, and Zoe had let him in without hesitation. Of course, I said. Marcus's life continued its downward spiral. The business never recovered. He lost the fancy downtown office, scaled back to a small operation. His new girlfriend, there was always a new girlfriend, left him after 6 months when she realized he was broke. His mother supported him financially, which must have stung given how he'd always prided himself on being self-made. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. I went back to school and got my MBA. I took a position with my family's real estate firm and discovered I was good at it, better than good. I had vision, instinct, the ability to see potential where others saw risk. Within 18 months, I'd become a partner. Zoe thrived. She made honor roll consistently. She joined the debate team. She started seeing a boy from her calculus class, and when she introduced him to me, she did it with confidence and openness because she knew I'd actually pay attention. She was becoming a strong, capable young woman despite her father, not because of him. And Julian? He spent more time at our house than at Marcus's. It started with homework help, then dinner a few times a week, then sleepovers on weekends when Marcus was too busy to parent. I never turned him away. He was a child who needed stability, and I could provide that without erasing my own daughter. You're more of a mom to him than a stepmom, my mother observed during one family dinner where Julian was laughing with Zoe over some inside joke. I'm not trying to be his mom, I said. I'm just trying to be a safe adult in his life. That's all any kid really needs. 3 years after the divorce, Marcus showed up at my house unannounced. He looked rough, older, tired, defeated. I need help, he said without preamble. With Julian. I can't. I'm not doing a good job. No, I agreed. You're not. He wants to stay here more. With you and Zoe. And I think that might be what's best for him. It took incredible courage to admit that, I realized. Maybe the only courageous thing Marcus had done in years. We can arrange that, I said carefully. But Marcus, if Julian lives here primarily, You need to be present for both your kids. Not just when it's convenient. Not just when you feel guilty. Consistently. Do you understand? He nodded, something broken in his expression. I ruined everything, didn't I? Yes, I said. Because he deserved honesty at least. You did. You had a family who loved you, and you blew it up because you couldn't be honest. You brought Julian into our lives in the cruelest way possible, and then you made both your children feel worthless by trying to overcompensate for your guilt. I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix it, Marcus. You can only do better going forward. Show up. Keep promises. Be present. Treat both your children like they matter equally. It's not complicated. Will they ever forgive me? I thought about Zoe's panic attacks, her tears, the nights she'd spent wondering why her father didn't love her anymore. I thought about Julian's confused face when Marcus missed another game, another recital, another moment that mattered. I don't know, I said honestly, but they might respect you again if you become someone worthy of respect. He left that day, and something shifted. Marcus didn't become a perfect father overnight, but he started trying. He showed up to Zoe's debate competitions. He made Julian's soccer games. He stopped canceling visits. It was the bare minimum, but it was more than he'd done in years. Julian moved in with us officially, with Marcus having visitation rights. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The child he'd brought home to prove his devotion ended up leaving him because that devotion was hollow. But in our house, Julian found what he'd been looking for. Stability, consistency, a place where he didn't have to compete for attention or wonder if he'd be remembered. Zoe gave him the gift of siblinghood, teaching him that family wasn't about DNA or obligation, but about showing up and caring consistently. On the 5-year anniversary of the day Marcus brought Julian home, I found myself in the kitchen again. A different kitchen, a different life, but the same woman who'd stood in shock watching her world implode. Zoe was applying to colleges. Julian was doing homework at the counter. My boyfriend David was cooking dinner, humming off-key to a song on the radio. It looked nothing like the life I'd planned, the perfect family portrait I'd tried so hard to maintain. It looked better, Mom, Zoe said, looking up from her laptop. I'm writing my college essay about family, about how it's not who you're born to, but who shows up for you. What are you saying? I asked. She smiled, that confident, genuine smile that had taken years to rebuild. I'm saying that Dad taught me what family isn't, and you taught me what it is. Julian looked up from his math homework. Can I put that in my essay too? I have to write about an important person. You can both plagiarize each other, I said, laughing. I won't tell. That night, after everyone was asleep, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the city lights. I thought about the woman I'd been, desperate to maintain perfection, willing to overlook my own diminishment, performing happiness while slowly disappearing. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that protecting her child meant protecting herself too. Someone who'd discovered that the end of a marriage wasn't the end of a life, but the beginning of a real one. Marcus had brought home a child he thought would complete his redemption, would prove he was a good man despite his betrayals. Instead, that child had exposed every flaw, every failure, every hollow promise. But Julian hadn't destroyed anything. He'd just revealed what was already broken. And in the wreckage, something new had grown. A family built not on obligation or appearance, but on choice. Zoe and Julian chose to be siblings. David and I chose to build something together. I chose to be the kind of parent who showed up, who remembered, who made both children feel seen. In the end, Marcus had done me a favor by bringing Julian home. He'd forced me to see what I'd been refusing to acknowledge. That my marriage was built on lies, that my husband was incapable of the love I deserved, that I'd been teaching my daughter to accept scraps by accepting them myself. The dissolution of that false family created space for a real one. And that, I realized, was the only justice that truly mattered. Not punishment, not revenge, but becoming someone my children could be proud of. Someone who chose integrity over convenience, truth over appearance, authentic connection over perfect performance. I'd spent years trying to be the perfect wife to an imperfect husband. Now I was just trying to be a good mother to 2 children who needed me. And that, finally, was enough.